The United States is phasing out federal private prisons, but does this mean the end of for-profit incarceration? I'm Femi Okay.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you are in the stream.
Rough, no structure. Unsafe. It's just a bad place. Hell. In a can.
Exposés like this one from Mother Jones magazine have uncovered brutal conditions at US private prisons, violence, poor medical care, and dozens of questionable deaths.
Now, these for-profit facilities could be on the way out. The Justice Department recently announced it's ending contracts with prison corporations. This will affect as many as 22,000 federal inmates in 13 privately managed facilities. A government investigation found them to be substandard and more dangerous than public prisons without saving money.
Then came another unexpected move. The Department of Homeland Security said it's considering ending privatized immigration detention as well. And these developments pose a major challenge to the multi-billion-dollar business of locking people up.
But the door is not shut on private prisons just yet. Tens of thousands of people are behind bars in private prisons at the state level, and federal decisions don't affect them. So with us to discuss, Robin Barnard, an attorney working on refugee rights for Human Rights First. Mark Bartlett, a former prison guard and activist. He joins us from California. Adrian Moore, Vice President of Policy at the Reason Foundation, joins us from Florida. And Shane Bauer is a senior reporter at Mother Jones. For his latest report, he spent 4 months working undercover as a guard at a private prison in Louisiana. He joins us from California.
Guess, Adrian, let me show you this here on my laptop. The United States Department of Justice, here, phasing out our use of private prisons. When you heard that, when you saw that, Adrian, what was your first thought?
Well, I had read the Inspector General's report, so I was surprised that this happened so fast. They clearly had been thinking about this long before the Inspector General's report came out. And I think they're leaping past their options here. They have contracts with these private prison operators, and if these problems need to be solved, which obviously they do in any facility, public or private, if you have these kind of problems, they need to be fixed. Why aren't they fixing them? They have people in all those private prisons whose job it is to make sure none of that happens, to make sure that company doesn't get paid if it's not meeting the terms of the contract. So either their contract doesn't actually require them to do health care and prevent violence and prevent inmate attacks on each other, or the contract does and they're not enforcing it. So my first thought is, why aren't they using the tools they have to improve conditions in these prisons? And why would we expect them to be any better in the public prisons if they don't care to fix them in the private prisons that they oversee? It's probably why we have 20 years of studies that show that pretty much conditions in public and private prisons are very much the same. There's no consistent pattern of either of them being qualitatively inferior or superior.
So, Adrian, when was the last time you were in a private prison? When was the last time?
The last time was probably about 4 years ago. I visited, I think, 6 private prisons and maybe 5 or 6 public prisons at various times.
Okay, so you mentioned problems. So, Mark, what kind of problems is Adrian alluding to?
I mean, these problems existed. These are things that I saw on a daily basis, and seeing this on day in, day out, whether it's a rise in population, right? Whether it's you double the amount. I've seen the transition from a small corporation, a small for-profit, to a giant such as CCA, Corrections Corporation of America, to where now they're cutting down on food. There's a rise in violence. There's no incentives for good behavior. The lack of programming and resources. So if it is in the contract stipulations for CCA to provide programs such as NA meetings, and they're not doing it, CCA needs to be held liable. And such things such as a lack of medical care on site. How do you have a detention facility with no medical care on site to provide for those, justice-involved individuals behind bars? And these are things that, and also such things such as petty violations, to where people receive write-ups to where now they are in custody much longer, so that CCA can generate more revenue off that one being. So human beings are literally turned into commodities. They are no longer seen as people. They are now items.
But this is a problem across any prison system. This is why we have many state correctional systems under court order or court supervision, because they've failed to provide safe and humane facilities. There's a fundamental accountability problem, I think, in a lot of these prisons. And what you're saying, I play golf with a group of public prison guards, and they have very similar complaints about how things are managed in the prisons where they work. I think these large bureaucratic organizations have a hard time driving things like programming. The reason there's no programs in the prisons you worked in is because states don't contract, and the federal government does not contract with these companies to provide programs, which is crazy. I think they should only get paid if they reduce recidivism.
So Mark and Adrian, you listed some things there that are wrong, the problems, and I hear the argument that the same happens in these government-run facilities as well. But here's a tweet I want to bring in here, and I'll direct this to you, Shane, from a Poverty POV. And she says what needs to happen in these prisons, these private prisons. She says hire trained guards, run background checks, enforce physical evaluations to protect both prisoners and security alike. And it's that first part about hiring trained guards that really gets me, because you wouldn't consider yourself a trained guard, correct?
No.
But you were hired. So tell us about that and how that happened.
The job that I was hired for was a $9 an hour job in Louisiana. It was for the Corrections Corporation of America. I essentially just filled out an application online truthfully, and got a job very quickly. The place that I worked, there were former felons working there. There were people who had been fired from other correctional positions for excessive force, and just a lot of poor people that were desperate for work. And people that had worked there for 20 years were still being paid $9 an hour. And when you have this kind of situation where you're not willing to spend the money that it takes to run a prison, you're going to run into these problems. And I just want to address some of the things that Adrian said. There have been studies for years, including from the Department of Justice, showing that private prisons are more violent and they have more issues with programs. These contracts do, in fact, require that they provide health care, they provide security, they specify the number of guards they're supposed to have. And companies like the Corrections Corporation of America flout these contractual requirements regularly. At Louisiana, there were days that I showed up for work where there were 24 guards for a prison of 1,500 inmates. This is far under the number that they are required to have. The state was showing up. They were trying to enforce, these contractual obligations. But part of the problem is that the company, when they're doing their record keeping, when guards are doing their record keeping on a daily basis, they're writing down things that are not happening. This has happened in several CCA prisons.
For example, what are they writing? What are they writing down, Shane? That's not happening.
For example, that guards are doing security checks. The guards are required every half hour to go up and down the dorms just to check out, what's going on. I almost never saw that happen. And it just comes back to the same issue that the guards are paid, so little. The morale is so low. They don't feel any reason to do the job to the extent required, and they know that they're not going to be fired if they don't do it.
But if the state has monitors in the facility, as they are supposed to do, all the time, why don't they see this? It's be pretty easy as a monitor to see that the checks are not being made. And to catch them doing this. So either they're not monitoring as they should, the state that's supposed to be responsible, or they are monitoring and they don't care. And so I have a problem seeing how having the people who don't care and can't monitor run the prison themselves. There's no reason to expect them to do any better job. I'd
Well,
rather hold their feet to the fire to do a better job.
Gentlemen, hold tight a minute. I just need to make a little space for Robin. Robin, what do you want to say?
Sure. Thanks for letting me jump in. I guess what I'd like to point out, if you read the Inspector General's report, what was clear was that these privately run prisons in the criminal facility context, as well as in the immigration detention context, I would say, are much less effective. They're less safe. And that's the point that was made in that report. And I don't think there's much room to argue with that.
And they're less safe because
this is a for-profit company that's running a place that they shouldn't be in charge of. If you look at recent reports of deaths in custody in the immigration detention context, for example, the Eloy Detention Center in Arizona, which is run by CCA, the Corrections Corporation of America, has had 14 deaths in custody, and it was found that it was subpar medical conditions that led to those deaths. And that detention center is charged with the care and the custody of these individuals that are detained there. And for example, one of the deaths in 2012 was found to be related to the fact that the facility staff took 8 hours to take the individual to the emergency room, and he died as a result of that. So to me, that's very concerning, and I think...
Are they stalling because it costs money? What's going on here?
I can't speak to that.
Oh.
Maybe one of, maybe
To
Mark
me it
or...
is.
Well, I could say in Louisiana, the issue...
Let me hear from Shane first, and then Mark. What's happening here with the medical treatment? Why is it being delayed?
I met a man, for example, who had lost his legs and fingers to gangrene. He had been going to the infirmary for months, complaining about pain in his legs.
Actually, Shane, there's a little clip, if I may. Can I just play this little clip, because I think it illustrates exactly what you're saying. This is Robert Scott, who needed to see a doctor but didn't. Have a listen.
Spoke for a while with an inmate who had no legs and no fingers. He had legs and fingers a year ago, but he lost them when he got gangrene in the prison.
Gangrene. Mr. Scott complained about that for months to the medical staff at Wynn. They gave him the equivalent of a couple of Motrin and told him to go away.
Never saw a doctor. Whole time.
And the reason we are seeing things like that happen, people online are telling the stream, is because this is a for-profit model that doesn't work. So this is Akash on Twitter. He says, anything creating an incentive to keep prisons full should be avoided on ethical grounds. Those profits should be repatriated for prisoners' welfare. There's another voice on that as well. This is a video comment we got from someone. I'm going to play it, and I want you to have a listen. This is Carl Takai.
Handing prisons over to for-profit companies is a recipe for abuse, neglect, and misconduct. The profit motive constantly incentivizes cutting corners with predictably horrible results. The Justice Department minced no words in declaring that its 2-decade experiment with private prisons is over because these institutions compare poorly to regular federal prisons. Given these findings, the Department of Homeland Security is going to have a very difficult time justifying why it is relying on the same companies to hold thousands of asylum seekers, children, and others who have not had a fair day in court.
So Mark, to that point, what gets sacrificed in the cost cutting as he sees it?
The first thing that jumps out at me is we should be talking a little more about why, his final point, why are all these people being locked up that shouldn't be locked up? If we didn't have such crowded facilities, we might have a lot fewer of these problems as well. And it's that crowding that has driven a lot of the privatization and to create more flexibility in the system. But on these healthcare problems have to be solved regardless of who's running the prison. You know, California, you're in California. California's entire prison system has been taken over by the courts because they had such a horrible healthcare system that patients were dying and patients were losing limbs and sick because there was grossly inadequate healthcare in that state system. That's the problem that needs to be solved. And I think focusing on this profit motive, for-profit companies make the baby seats we put in our car. They make the cars. They make our drugs, our food, our water.
It's the prison industrial complex.
The profit.
You talked about medical care. The prison industrial complex being Corizon, the largest healthcare provider for people in prisons. And let me touch back on this, is that when it comes to a for-profit prison, running a prison, a reentry center, and this and that, so you have the prison industrial complex, the treatment industrial complex, there is no incentive to want to rehabilitate. So they are cutting down on costs on everything. So it is not an environment that's conducive for an individual who's in incarceration to transition back into their communities. So we see the cut down on costs.
All these contracts
so
should be
people are not
completely
provided with
redone
the proper
to drive.
So, gentlemen, Adrian, hold tight for a moment because I can't hear Mark. Mark, finish your sentence.
So if you're not providing individuals proper nutrition, people are going to act up. If there are not proper AC units, such as the for-profit prisons in Texas, people are going to act up, which is what CCA wants, because then these individuals they're going to do something behind the confines of walls where they get more time. The lack of programming, the no incentives for good behavior, to where it's all about money. And to where here in America, it makes no sense to where how we are turning people merely into products. People, that's what we need to wake up to. Is that how is it that we have a for-profit prison running?
None of the data shows that there are more people getting sentences added to their sentences in private prisons than in public. And
all right, so gentlemen, I hear the back and forth there. Let me just add another take into the mix here, Adrian. Give me a moment, because I hear where you and Mark are going back and forth. I want to hear what Robin has to add to this. Go ahead.
So I think we're losing sight of, in terms of the Department of Homeland Security's announcement, that applies to the civil immigration detention system. And these are individuals who, on the whole, are not criminals. They're asylum seekers, they're immigrants who maybe overstayed their visa in this country. This is meant to be a civil and administrative system, not punitive, not penal, and it's not meant to be like a prison. And what we are seeing is that for-profit prison companies like the Corrections Corporation of America or GEO Group are running these immigration detention centers, which are meant to be administrative, and instead we're seeing asylum seekers who flee enormous harm in their home countries and come to this country to seek protection. They're placed in prison-like conditions. They're told to wear uniforms, they're put in shackles, they have severe limits on their freedom. And I think that is the conversation we need to be focusing on. Why do we have so many of these people in these facilities? Instead, we should be asking the government to move past that initial decision. Yes, we should end the use of these private prison facilities, and then focus on how do we put that into action, and how do we reduce the number of asylum seekers and immigrants who are placed in detention unnecessarily. But
they're not saying they're going to get rid of those facilities. They say they're going to move in government guards to take over for the private guards.
I think what the announcement was is that they're going to look at whether they should end the use of those facilities, which I think based on the DOJ announcement,
not the facilities.
Right, so I think that we should say that yes, they should end the use and whatever, if it's bringing in
if these facilities are ridiculous. But that's not what
so I have someone who agrees with you both, since you have a little bit of agreement there. This is Ringnam on Twitter, who says he agrees as well, but the lobby is intensely powerful, and he's talking about the private prison industry lobby, which will make it difficult. I hear you kind of sighing there, but I want to pivot just a little bit, because you hear that this person saying the lobby is powerful, and so these companies are not going away. This is another perspective. This is Dara, who says most prisons aren't private, most private prisons aren't federal, most federal private prisons are run by the Department of Homeland Security, and this new memo only affects 13 prisons. So Shane, do you see there being a domino effect, or is this just a 13 prison incident and then we're done?
Well, I mean, this decision doesn't affect the states, in a practical way, but I think that we could see a domino effect. We're already seeing DHS considering closing, getting rid of these companies. And just to touch on the point of lobbying, the Corrections Corporation of America has lobbied against bills that would allow greater media access. Part of the reason that I took this job as a prison guard is because it's very hard to get information from about what's going on inside private prisons, because they are not subject to public records laws because they're not public institutions. They are very active in preventing people from knowing what's going on inside of these prisons. And I think Adrian is trying to make the point that public prisons also have problems. There's no doubt about this. There's problems, major problems throughout our prison system. But the fact is there are specific problems that pertain to private prisons. To give you some examples from Louisiana, while I was there, a man escaped. He jumped over 2 fences in the middle of the day in the view of guard towers. Nobody saw him escape. There were no guards in the guard towers because the company cut those positions to save money. There were a lot of stabbings in the prison. In training, we were taught not to intervene in stabbings or any fights physically. We call for backup, and some minutes later, a special operations team shows up. But the guards don't even have pepper spray or billy clubs, and it costs money. It's a liability to have guards get in the way, potentially get hurt, and back to the healthcare issue. When the company, at least in Louisiana, when the company takes somebody out to a hospital, they have to pay for that. And when a state facility, the administrators of the state facility are not going to be considering how much it's going to cost them. It's not their concern. In a private prison, it is. And these pressures affect how the place is actually run.
Robin?
Yes, I'd like to suggest something as well, looking past our use of these prisons and detention centers and what alternatives there are. Instead of putting hundreds of thousands of people each year in these immigration detention centers, there are proven alternatives, like community-based alternatives to detention programs that have very high rates of compliance, both in appearance and then even compliance with removals for those who are ordered removed from this country.
Do you think that's more likely to happen now that private prisons are being phased out, or the contracts are being phased out in the US?
Well, talking in terms of the immigration detention system, I'd hope that would be what DHS turns to instead. It's
but we
proven...
don't know whether that will actually happen. You don't know whether the private federal prisons will then have an impact on these immigration centres that are also run.
We hope it will. I think the Secretary Johnson's announcement is an indication that he's looking very closely to what the Department of Justice has announced, and we hope that he'll take that as a lesson for the DHS system as well.
Right.
But it is yet to be seen.
And here in California.
Yeah, Mark, hold tight for a moment, because I just want to go back to community, and then we're...
Well, actually, Mark, I was going to go to you with this because you heard Robin mention her alternatives. This is John's. He says lawyers, judges, bureaucrats generate revenue by brokering deals which land people in prison when they shouldn't be there. Prison is supposed to be about justice, not about profit centers. So for his own case, John says, I'm unlikely to report crimes I don't think deserve prison, petty theft or assault, because I think that person will be too easily incarcerated for too long. That's his solution right there. What are alternatives that you're eyeing?
Prison and justice, yes, but rehabilitation, that's what we need to look at. We need to actually, when people are behind the confines of these prison walls, let's come up with, authentic programs that is actually going to reduce recidivism in California. I wanted to touch on Senator Ricardo Lara's bill, SB 1289, which could, potentially prevent cities and counties in this state from operating for-profit immigration centers. And so, alternatives to where, yes, we do have, I prefer community-based programs, but let's be real, the treatment industrial complex is there, and it's happening now, and CCA is diving into that. And here in San Diego, there's no incentive to want to rehabilitate. So it's even worse how we have CCA and GEO wanting to dive into residential community rehabilitation centers, halfway homes, electronic monitoring, to where they're not really helping people. So now they're diving into this new sector. And yes, I'm glad that the DOJ, the DHS came out with this report. But with the wording, it says prisons. But are we talking about re-entry centers? Are we talking about halfway homes? Because the Federal Bureau of Prisons, they have huge contracts with CCA when it comes to...
So you're listening to Mark Bartlett. He's a former prison guard. Mark, we will continue our conversation online at stream.aljazeera.com. We also have Robin Barnard, Adrian Moore and Shane Bauer as well. We're talking about the US phasing out private prisons, federal ones, what that impact might be. Join our conversation online. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody. Hello again. If you're with us, you're online. Thanks for joining our exclusive post show. We are discussing private prisons in the US. Have a look here. This is from The Nation. Private prison companies are embracing alternatives to incarceration. Malika Blau, what do you have?
That is exactly what everyone wants to pivot to online, because Mark there was making a point about how these companies are now redirecting their efforts. This is Arjun on Twitter who says the same thing. Private prisons now profit off the treatment, the rehabilitation, and the re-entry of inmates. So he wants to know how we end the treatment industrial complex. That's kind of a hypothetical question there, because I want to play this video here with someone who has some more concrete thoughts. This is Mary.
Privately owned prisons are just part of the privatization problem. Many services are already privatized, such as healthcare, with disastrous results across the country. Other services include the mail services and telephone services for prisoners, the provision of ways for family members to deposit money in prison accounts, and the privatization continues after prison with ankle monitoring and probation services. All of these are crucial services that should not be handled by for-profit corporations.
So Robin, she says these things shouldn't be handled by for-profit corporations. What do you think?
I totally agree. I think, Immigration and Customs Enforcement does have an alternative to detention program that they run themselves, which, as she mentioned, involves wearing of ankle monitors, that is also subcontracted to a subsidiary of GEO, the GEO group that runs many of the immigration detention centres. So that is very troubling. I think that the community-based models are much more effective and also are more cost-effective for the government. So I think that should be a focus for the Department of Homeland Security, and I hope it is going forward. In my experience working with families who are in some of the family detention centres across the country, many of them spend a long time in detention. They feel like they're being punished after fleeing terrible violence in their home countries. And then they're released with ankle monitors, which they see as just another form of imprisonment. And they have no means of liberty and really being able to enjoy their freedom. I saw one mother who was trying to breastfeed her young child while she was charging her ankle monitor that had to be into the wall slot. So it's not a nice thing in reality. And again, it's just generating big profits for these companies like GEO that has that contract with DHS. So I hope that we move to more of a community-based model, and I hope that's a focus of this advisory council that Secretary Johnson has asked to look at this, what they do.
So Robin, now. Adrian doesn't look impressed. Adrian, what's the matter?
Well, I mean, though the problem of how these people are punished is, I think, very real. But to be against the profit motive in its own right, I mean, Shane, Mark, and I are here on Skype. Skype is usable for a television show, not because this for-profit company is constantly trying to make the product worse, but because they're constantly trying to make it better. All around us in our life, we see the profit motive driving things getting better. So to me, I'm like, come on, government, can't you use that?
I think it's a problematic mode because they're constantly looking at ways to increase their ability to detain people and increase the number of people that they can put ankle monitors on.
That's what's factually
so Adrian,
not true.
May can I share something with you, Adrian?
This point. I've been trying forever.
Go on. All right, make your point, and now I'm going to share something with you. Go ahead.
For private prison companies do not lobby against alternative treatment. For private profit prison companies do not lobby to put more people in prison. They give lots of money to campaign people running for office. That's what their political giving is. Public prison guards, government prison guards, give millions of dollars to laws like 3 strikes and detention laws and immigration laws designed to put more people in prison. They lobby against alternative. Every time there's a ballot initiative in Florida or California for alternatives
Adrian, if you finish making your point, we're
almost
out of time.
Or to reduce 3 strikes,
Mark, hold tight. Let Adrian finish his point.
Putting money into the lobbying against it.
All right, Adrian, hold tight, everybody. I want to play you this little bit. This is from Shane's undercover investigation. Here's Shane talking about his paycheck. Have a listen.
Today was the end of my 3rd week, and I got my first paycheck. The paycheck, which is for 2 weeks of work, is for $587. I honestly do not know how somebody lives on that wage here.
So Shane, is that, from Adrian's perspective, is that just trying to make the product better by making it cheaper, more cost effective?
Well, let me tell you one of the things that happens as a result of that. The prison in Louisiana that I worked at had major issues with contraband. Guards were bringing in drugs and cell phones and selling them to prisoners. A big part of training was them telling us, that we're going to be tempted. I had one instructor say that as soon as you start working here, you're going to realize that you're not making enough money for this job. And when a prisoner asks you to bring in drugs for him, you're going to be tempted. That happens. I mean, it happens all the time. When people can't live on the wage that they're making, they're going to find another way to do it. And if the purpose of your company is to run a prison that is secure and safe and that, has programs, then, paying somebody that little is actively working against that. And the reason that happens is because that's not your only job. Your other job is also to raise the stock and to make profit.
And so this environment that Shane's, I can relate to it as well. So it's an environment that they create. So when workers are being, receiving measly paychecks, who wants to go to work? Who's going to work to actually want to help these people and talk to them like human beings, right? They're going to go into work with a bad attitude. And that goes on to the people who are, are incarcerated, to where they're like, you're not doing nothing for us, so we're going to act up. So this is an environment that these for-profit entities create by not providing with programs, by not providing them with proper nutrition, by not providing them with resources, by not paying their staff well, by not providing them with personal safety equipment to prevent, altercations and violence from occurring in these facilities. And these are things that I witnessed firsthand, and it makes me sick. It totally makes me sick, because, like I'm saying, I'm going to tie. People are merely turned into items.
So Guess, I'm really curious. If we could just fast forward ourselves in 5 years' time, would there be private detention facilities, private prisons, or would they be all being phased out? Not just the federal ones, but the state ones as well. Just a quick answer, because we're literally out of time. Robin, what do you think? 5 years' time? Because there's a grey area. We don't know what's going to happen next. Exactly.
Sure. I hope yes. I think that's the logical step. I think if anyone reads the Inspector General's report, I think they should all be gone within the next 5 years.
Mark, this is what you protest against. What do you think? 5 years' time? Will you still be protesting?
I'll be protesting until for-profit prison corporations and re-entry centers are gone, and that's a battle that I will continue to fight until there is when CCA and GEO no longer exist here in America.
Adrian, what do you think?
I think they're going to find it a lot harder to phase those out than they realize, and I think getting rid of them would be a huge mistake. Instead, private prisons are a tool, and they need to learn to use them better to drive better results and end these problems, instead of just getting rid of the tool and still leaving the problems on the table.
Shane, you've got a unique viewpoint of this. What do you think? 5 years' time, we'll be done with private prisons
I don't
in the
think
United
private
States?
prisons are all going to be gone in 5 years, but I do think that we're going to see other systems start phasing it out. I expect that some states are going to follow the federal government's lead, as happens with many criminal justice reforms. And states, even before this, have been looking at it. And, I saw that firsthand in Louisiana, that the state was pushing back against the Corrections Corporation of America. I think, this was a tool that was used to deal with overcrowding, and it's existed for a few decades, and we've seen that it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Appreciate your time, guests. Thank you very much for being part of this discussion. Malika.
Well, that enter from James on Twitter, who basically answers the question you asked, Femi. He says it won't have that much impact initially, but the precedent set by this could be profoundly influential in regards to each state.
Robin, Mark, Adrian, Shane, appreciate your time on today's discussion on the stream. Thanks very much. Take care, everybody.